Into It, Sold Not For Sale podcast. Coach Colin here. Joe Rogan sitting down with Terrence Howard, Eric Weinstein. Terrence actually got something right. No bones about it. No, this is right. He actually got something right, and that is the periodic table and it being converted into sound. That's what they're going to talk about in this clip. I find it very interesting. They bring up someone named Stanley Jordan. Been looking into him a little bit. He seems like an absolute genius. He's almost like a scientist, but instead of like beakers and mixtures, he just uses his guitar. I'm going to show you a little bit of him. I'm going to show you a little bit of another gentleman who's actually sharing Terrence Howard's ideas in this periodic sound light type of science, I guess we could call it. I'm not even sure what to call this, theory. And then I'm going to touch on, of course, because your boy doesn't take off the tinfoil Speedo. We're going to touch on something else after we're done all this. Let's get into it.
Herpes. Basically what these are little nature's version of linchpins that come together to form platonic solids, which are the triangular platonic solids are valued because the triangle is a stable structure. If you think about a square can become a parallelogram very easily. So they're not very, engineers will use triangles over squares. What you need to do, in my opinion, is to figure out the Eternal One's understanding of these structures and how he or she creates these things with the stability that actually use the imperfections just the way you were using the imperfections. And by the way, I did look at this years ago and totally discarded it because 108 wasn't equal to 109.47. Right. It's close. And the fact that you're willing to deal with something doped with imperfection is what actually is the genius akin to even temperament.
Well, it's like, how do you walk? You don't walk by a perfect gait.
Yeah.
You walk by moving past the point of equilibrium and catching yourself.
Well
it's
said.
the catching.
I don't know how to think like that. I think perfectly, not imperfectly, and it's to my detriment in many situations.
Well, you've got an incredible mind.
As do you, sir.
Stuff.
Can we go back to the main page? Because another thing that I see you taking a lot of guff for is the periodic table. Now, I don't like your periodic table, but you are also the only person I know who's pushing into the public consciousness the understanding. Okay, so first of all, do you know Stanley Jordan?
Not by name.
All
You
right.
smoke weed?
Stanley Jordan is one of the, I don't even want to call him a guitarist. He's an alien intelligence from another universe. But if you go up and you click that, people have been saying that Terrence Howard is making up this thing about the periodic table and the sound of the elements. And I want you to hear what he calls sonification.
The ionization energies of the elements as represented here in a periodic table, and we are going to produce tones representing those energies. The way that this app works is each one of these elements in the table is actually a push button, and I can play tones with these push buttons. The settings in this control panel here will determine how those energies will be converted into tones that we can hear. First of all, we're just going to look at a few of the controls for now. See, we have transpose frequency. The frequencies corresponding to these ionization energies are extremely high, so we have to transpose them down to arrange them.
As you said.
So here we're going to transpose it down, in this case, 42 octaves, negative 42. So let's start with hydrogen. If I transpose it 43 octaves down, I get that tone. Or I can go 44 octaves down. I can also transpose it chromatically. As you can see here, I can go up and up again and up again. But normally I set that at 0 and just leave it there, and I only change the octave. Let's go back to 42, and I'm going to show you some of the other controls that we have here. The duration is in seconds, so here we go, 1 second long. Or we could go longer, let's say 2 seconds. And the damping factor controls how quickly the tone decays. 3 is kind of like a nice...
So what he's doing is he's preparing you for the fact that he's going to play the periodic table. And by the way, I just want to say this thing. Stanley Jordan is a friggin' mega genius.
I see that now.
And what you're talking about, I was talking with him about several years ago, and what he was going to do is to mine the periodic table for the music of the elements and also go beyond that for molecules.
See, I tried to do the same thing, and I called...
People treat you like you're nuts.
I called UCLA asking for the prime resonant frequency of the elements, and they wouldn't give them to me. Nobody would give them to me.
Well, because in part... Wait, listen to this.
Boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, neon. Now, what happens is, as you start listening to these, you start to notice
That's an E
patterns.
sharp.
Let me go and go through this second row again, but I won't say them. I'll just go ahead and play through them. Kind of a beautiful melody, isn't it? Now, these pitches that we're hearing are determined straight from a calculation based on the actual energy of the element. So we are getting tones that you couldn't necessarily play on a piano. A lot of them would fall in between the keys. So they don't fit our conventional
They're
Western
sense sharp or
musical
sense
pitch
flat.
system. But if you want it to fit, we can enable this. It says quantized pitch. So all these pitches are slid to the nearest note.
So when you
in the
say key of
chromatic
E.
scale. The chromatic scale just means all of the notes that we could play on a
And
piano.
I'm talking
That's the
about
best way to explain
432
it.
when I'm
So
talking
what I'm
about
gonna
the
do is
key
I'm
of
gonna go through
E
these again a little
on
more
it.
quickly,
Well, you
and
make
I'm
an
gonna
error
shorten the
again.
duration.
So you say this thing about hydrogen 40.5.
Well, no,
hertz.
I wasn't
wait,
saying.
Wait a second.
no,
Wait a second.
But I wasn't saying that hydrogen is 40.5. I was saying that the key of E is 40.5 hertz and doubles to 162. Those things.
Yeah, but you said it in a very authoritative way. And the
but
one
you-
and the
if-
40.5 is not 40.5 hertz. It's 40.5 megahertz, associated not with hydrogen but with mercury.
But you have to keep once you keep doubling that.
But wait a
you'll
second,
get
Terrence.
to the
You activated a bunch of chemists who said, "I don't know this frequency."
because they're looking at 440. They're looking at their
No, 440 is an
changed their
irrelevancy,
440
Terrence.
to it.
440 is concert A in a time when we've decided that that is concert A. If you were to use the Hindustani system, let's say, instead of do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do,
It was ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la.
no, they do sa, re, ga, ma, pa, sa, re, ga, pa, da, pa, ga, sa, re, ga, re, sa, re. They use a
I
different.
did the Sophelgian. I did the Sophelgian
I know.
skill. That's what I
But I'm
did.
saying this is that for North India, right? It's an irrelevancy because everybody's allowed to tune their sa to a different tone. They don't have to tune their sa around A440 because there's only three instruments. There's a tabla which doesn't have that tone as an important part. There's a tanpura which is tuned to the soloist, and the soloist determines what their sa should be. So can we do sa re ga? So in that system, the absolute value doesn't matter because you can tune it to whatever you want to tune it. You're not trying to come up with an orchestra. It's only the orchestral aspect of Western music and the need for even temperament that forces us all to listen to the concertmaster as to what A440 is, right? Okay.
Joseph Goebbels pushed that around the world.
Okay, let's not do Joseph Goebbels. Just keep drinking whiskey. What you have is a situation in which nobody understood what you said about the periodic table, except for a tiny number of people. Now, if we go to that page, Jamie, that we put up, back below that, the sound of hydrogen from WSU. So this is an academic page dedicated to the idea that you're trying to figure out how to play these things, and this is the sonification. Now, you attribute more meaning to this, I think, but you need to know about a guy named Luca Turin, who's a buddy of mine in the UK at Buckingham University, which is trying to do some wild radical stuff. They are working on the idea that smell is not based on shape, but is based on frequency of the valence electrons, and that particles that vibrate the same way smell the same, even if their shapes are different. And if their shapes are very similar, but their vibrations are very different, they don't smell the same. So there's an entire book called The Emperor of Scent about the academic, like all the people who try to push you down. They're trying to push Luca Turin down as if he doesn't know what's going on. He's written the Bible of perfume. I don't know if you like scent.
I do.
He understands the vibratory quality of scent. And so trying to sort of synesthese these things by saying that everything that has frequency and vibration can be understood in each other's terms is a small freak community of very smart people trying to do what it is you're doing. The only problem is you gave us, people ask me for an analogy. What do you think of Terrence Howard? That's all I got for like a week. Can we pull up the
Terrence Howard, Joe Rogan experience?
Yeah. No. The Janet, we're having that right now. The Janet, it'll come up as Janet left step periodic table. What you did to the periodic table was, by the way, what a gift that I hate the periodic table. Can't stand it. The problem is I had to analogize when people ask me what I thought of it. Let's click on that thing. That periodic table is one of the alternate periodic tables that's much more in favor with people who are mathematically minded like you are, rather than the Walter Russell periodic table. Because what this does is it uses the quantum mechanics to stop with those exceptions. Isn't it weird that there's like a footnote in the middle of the standard periodic table in which you just say, well, these things are exceptions?
Okay, so now from there, it's so much weird stuff in there. Just the fact that he brought up, he goes, oh, smell. They're trying to move away from smell being based on shape. Hey, anybody out there? Have you been smelling things based on their shape? Is that how it works? I thought it was just, I don't know what I thought. I thought we just smell things. I didn't realize shape had anything to do with it, or frequency for that matter. I don't know. But I like what's going on here. Again, it goes to what Terrence was talking about with Joe Rogan. I don't know if you remember the part, but he was talking about how, there's a sound for each element. And this is actually true. This is very true. And here's the amazing thing. Now, Terrence is self-taught, so you could argue that he just went and found this information and he's talking about it. Or, like a lot of what he's talking about with the shapes and everything, these are things he's kind of coming to his own conclusions about. And he's coming to these conclusions rather slowly because it's just him figuring it out because the rest of the world thinks he's crazy. What's really cool is, as Eric, who's completely unaware of the camera angle he's at, I don't know why Jamie or Joe didn't correct him and say, hey man, you got to face this way, or, bring a new camera angle in, something. I don't know why they didn't do that, but now that Eric is, for at least for this podcast, working alongside Terrence, letting him know, hey, there's communities of people who do think the way you think. Only difference is they're probably going to think a little weird about his whole 1 times 1 math. That's probably where they're always going to butt heads no matter what community he goes into. But if he just pushes that aside and doesn't bring that up and just focuses on just the sounds alone, that could be something. Because here's the thing. In this podcast, I don't know if you've watched this. I've gone through it a few times now. But the one thing Eric keeps going towards as something that could be viable is the drone technology. These little shapes, these little things that Terrence has put together. He keeps talking about that and how that could be something. I believe that goes along with or is the linchpin that Terrence is talking about. So if Terrence keeps on working with that technology, whatever he's created there, I'll call it technology. I know a lot of people are like, he doesn't make technology, he's not smart. Whatever. He's made something. If he keeps going with that, keeps on moving towards each element having a sound, having a frequency, you could have, and this is just me, just, ex weed head here, you could have something that is like a drone that's moving around based on sound, frequency. I have to say, a lot of what I think happened with the pyramids, when you figure out where the stone is from, how long it had to travel, in my mind, it seems like somebody understood something about frequency back then, and they were just using frequency to move these big things and to cut them so precisely as they did. That's just me. That's a different topic, but who knows? This could be bringing Terrence on the way to something big. Now, there are people who are thinking about this already. The acoustic chemical orchestra plays the periodical table. So there are a lot of people working on this. Hydrogen, helium, oxygen, neon, iron. There's a whole bunch of people that are working on stuff like this. This video I already have here. I have it pulled up here. Listen to this. There's another guy. His name's Walker Smith, and he's been working on this. He does his demonstration kind of for kids. He's trying to make this fun and colorful for kids, and it links to them understanding the periodic table and also getting to move around and dance. It's a pretty good idea, but it does go along with what Terrence is talking about.
The periodic table was hanging on your wall in science class, right? You could see the elements, but did you know you can actually hear them?
Well, a recent college graduate who grew up in Knoxville has actually captured the sounds of science.
My name is Roy G. Biv. The G stands for Gary.
AKA Walker Smith, a self-proclaimed musical chemist. The Knoxville native has combined his love of music and science to stage a show for the senses.
Fair warning, you should buckle your seatbelts because things are about to get elemental. Hit it.
What you are hearing are the sounds of elements in concert.
And so it's a nice light show and like a kind of like an EDM like party thing. It's a lot of fun, and kids love it. I mean, they're always like jumping up and down and dancing completely unprompted.
The recent graduate of Indiana University made the connection between.
Just to say, this has nothing to do with pride or anything like that. It's based on the whole color spectrum and the musical spectrum. That's the only reason he's dressed like that. Just saying.
Between chemical properties and sound while in college. For an entire semester, he created a presentation that included a musical periodic table.
And elements, if you heat them or zap them with electricity or give them energy in some way, the electrons will, they're like hanging around the nucleus, but they can like gain a bunch of energy. And then when they drop down, they'll release all that stored energy as light.
He took the light frequencies and then converted them into sounds. Each element is unique. This is the sound of hydrogen. And this is oxygen. His molecular melodies recently scored him a presentation in front of scientists from around the country at the American Chemical Society meeting earlier this year.
And I would not have imagined in my wildest dreams that I would be wearing a rainbow suit like 4 of the 5 days out of the conference, and be presenting on something to do with music at a chemistry conference.
Walker hopes his Sounds of Science can be used as a teaching tool in classrooms to inspire future musicians, scientists, or like him, musical scientists.
Both the
So there you go. This guy, there's a bunch of people, the person that Eric brought up, the 2 people that he brought up. There's a lot of people who are actually working on this, who have the same mindset as Terrence in this one regard. Not saying Terrence is all of a sudden right about everything, but amazing things happen when you start finding people who are like-minded, or at least have the same chord line of thought, whatever you want to say. Kind of like back in the day, pandemic time, you kind of think you're crazy. You're sitting in your house. You're like, I don't know if I want to do the thing. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you run into somebody else who's like, yeah, I'm thinking that too. And then you find out there's a whole community of people who don't want to. And you're like, oh gosh, okay, I'm not crazy. Okay, guys, let's get together. Let's share some ideas. It makes you feel good. And then you can move forward with a little more confidence. I hope that does happen for Terrence. Honestly, the one thing I've been focused on this whole time is progress. I hope that he makes some kind of progress in whatever direction he's going in, because he brings up so many different things. I kind of started the same way. This is Stanley Jordan, if you didn't know. I started the same way when it came to film. I didn't know how to do anything in film. I barely knew how to work a computer. If the governor of New York was talking about me, she would have been right. I didn't know how to use a computer at all. I was terrible at it, actually. And then slowly, I got in with some people who did know how. I had a little bit of money. I was able to buy some things. They taught me some things, and then things got rolling. And now I'm doing this, and I've worked in actually Hollywood, big movies. This is Stanley Jordan. This guy, like Eric said, is a straight up genius. I'm just going to play this random clip of just him talking about music and what he thinks about it. Right now, he is a little different than Terrence, although he has touched on the periodical table. He's focused on how frequency and sound can actually help people therapeutically, not just in terms of you having a good time and listening to music, but actually heal you within.
The essence of what I've been hungering for all this time. And so I realized that given this connection, this kind of metaphor with the world, I think it's the same thing. I think if we decided, okay, look, we're going to go for it, we're going to change our energy sources, we're going to change our lifestyle and all that stuff. If we just decided to go ahead and do it because we've aligned our priorities, we know what's important, then once we get started on that process, all these problems and all these discomforts and worries about the economy and all this stuff is going to go away, because we're going to get so caught up in the day-to-day creativity of finding new ways to refashion our lifestyle, things that we can't even think about now until we get into that process. And so this is when the light bulbs just totally went off for me, because I realized that this really is the missing piece as I see it. Figuring out this internal kind of stuff. Like I say, we have the theories, we have the technology coming down the pike. So the real question is, what's going on inside of us? What is the sort of the inner technology of dealing with getting over our limited thinking, dealing with our emotions, getting to the point where we are able to muster the will to make the changes that we need to make. And it's only that initial step, because once you get over that step, I think we're going to find it's easier than we think. One of the things that I enjoy so much about studying music therapy is just finding all the different ways that music can be used. And a lot of these things are things that you don't have to be a trained music therapist to do. And people a lot of times ask me about this because they say, well, what can I do? I don't know anything about therapy or music. There's so many things that people can do. Like one example is I have a few books that I recommend. There's this one book that's called The Green Book of Songs by Subject. And it's this big fat book that's just a list of songs, but they're classified in an outline by subject. So you could look up a song based on any concept, like think of a word. It's almost kind of like a thesaurus of musical titles. And so then what you do is you look through this and you start to think about, you think about situations where this song might be meaningful to somebody, you know. So just one example is the song about, I don't know the title of it, but that old song, he had high hopes, he had high apple pie in the sky hopes. Remember that song? That's a song about somebody achieving something that maybe seemed impossible. But because they had the will from the inside, they went ahead and they just did it, you know? And so maybe you or someone you know is trying to accomplish something and they're experiencing resistance. A song like that might be inspiring, you know? Maybe you...
So this guy's very, very much out there, if I say so myself. I think he's hitting the same wavelength as Terrence. He feels like he has discovered a lot of things, but again, back to progress. This gentleman's made a lot of progress. This interview is called Stanley Jordan, Interview with a Legendary Musician from the Sonic Healing series. So he talks a lot about that. There's one more person who actually talks about some stuff that Terrence is talking about. I'm not going to play the actual interview. It's really, really vulgar. They touch on a lot of violent stuff. It's not super YouTube friendly, but this gentleman's name is Tentacion. And he was talking about, in this clip, he's talking about frequency. And he's talking about how in the music industry, they will use lower frequencies to bring about lower states of being inside of young people, to make them depressed, to make them sad, to give them anxiety, things of that nature. And he was talking about how he figured out a way to make people feel good. He was talking about curing depression, quote unquote, curing depression, anxiety, things of that nature, all with his music. And he figured it out through hertz, kilohertz, megahertz, things of that nature. So it's just very interesting because, you know, soon after he did this interview, he passed away. And it was very odd the way that he passed away. But there's been a lot of people who have talked about stuff like this. So I just found it interesting that the one thing that Terrence is actually hitting the notes on in Eric Weinstein's eyes is actually something that a lot of people are thinking about, and it's something that's taking place in the music industry right now. They are actually, again, tinfoil speedo, they are using music to make us feel certain ways. Which is why, in my experience, when I don't listen to hip hop, when I stay away from rap music and hip hop, I've been saying this for more than a decade. My life gets way better. I feel better. I do better things. I think better thoughts. When I stay away from mainstream music, I feel much better. I just do. I don't know what it is. I don't know who's doing what, but I'm just saying it's just a very interesting topic. I know I jumped around a little bit. We're far away from what Eric Weinstein was talking about, but it's some interesting stuff to look into. And again, Terrence Howard might be onto something. hopefully in 10 years from now, he is doing something with this drone technology, with this sound and the elements and all of this stuff. I hope he humbles himself enough to be in rooms where people are saying he's wrong so he can figure out what's right and just move forward from there. Because on the road he's going, he's just going to be somebody, the road he was going on, he's just going to be someone who people are just going to say, yeah, he had a lot of crazy ideas and none of them ever worked or went into practice. And like, where does that leave us? Anyways, I think this is the last video I'm going to do on this this podcast. It was a long one. It's an interesting one. I have a really good feeling we're going to see Terrence Howard on Joe Rogan's podcast again. Seems like they've kindled a bit of a friendship. I don't think this is going to be the last time we're going to see them. And I don't think this is going to be the last time we see Eric Weinstein and Terrence Howard together. So I would get ready for that. For all the people that love it, get ready for that. It's going to be a great time. For all the people that hate it, that hate that Terrence Howard is talking all of this stuff. And, you know, I heard one person in the comment section of my other videos talking about how it's a lot of buffoonery that he's talking about. Get ready, because I don't think he's done. I don't think he's done. Progress. That's the key. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think in the comments section. What do you think about the music industry using frequencies to make us feel down, to demoralize us in a certain sense, aside from the lyrics? Because once we get into the lyrics, oh, they're trying to make us think all sorts of terrible stuff. But what do you think about music actually bringing us down? Some music. For me, I see it mainly in hip hop. I've never explored hard rock or anything like that. But in hip hop, I see it so clearly. You can see it in the kids who listen to it, to the grown people who listen to it. It is not a music, it is not a frequency that fosters growth and fosters good behavior. That's just me talking. Anyways, guys, like, subscribe, all of that good stuff. Other than that, I'm out.